Hey kindergarten teachers, and welcome to Module 3, Unit 3, PLC Deep Dive. Researching to build knowledge and teach others trees are alive. A study of how living things meet their needs. Just a reminder, take a moment to use that bit.ly to pull up the PLC notes for kindergarten and this session that you will use to kind of jot down your thinkings, wonderings, questions, and anything to unpack our upcoming unit. My email is listed down there on the left side of the screen. Please reach out with questions or wonderings about the upcoming unit. So our session agenda will follow the same format that we've been doing with our opening, with our module overview, backwards planning, standards, unit overview, and then lesson or task in action. And then we will close out. So taking a look at our 4 T's for the Unit 3, our topic is the study of how living things meet their needs. Our task, students will be doing a science talk, and then the text for that, or what students will be using, are going to be our different tree texts. We have the sugar maple, that's going to be the teacher model. You'll be modeling with the sugar maple, the paper birch, live oak, quaking aspen, weeping willow, and coast redwood. So making sure that students have access to those texts and they will get to choose their group that they would like to study. The targets are listed here off on that bottom left quadrant. Students, or in a few slides, we will take a look at what students will be doing specifically by looking at the standards that they'll be working on for this upcoming unit. So for our Unit 3 close-up, starting with our big idea and guiding question, what patterns can we observe and how living things meet their needs? Here are some potential answers as students are working through trying to figure out an answer to this guiding question. Living things have needs to live and grow. Plants and trees need water and light to live and grow. Animals get food from plants or other animals or both. Just a reminder about these big ideas and guiding questions. Post this question somewhere inside of your classroom, whether it's on an anchor chart, somewhere where students can always be reminded what is their focus for this unit specifically, and allow them as they're learning things to take a sticky note, jot down a picture or an answer to this question as they continue to grow and learn more about their topic. So taking a look at Unit 3 up close, students will hone in on their research skills by combining their understanding of the needs of all living things with information about specific trees and the animals that depend on those trees. Students will engage in focused research as they become experts in one tree. They're going to describe the tree and learn about the needs of the tree, as well as what food the tree provides to different animals. Students will engage in a variety of small group and whole group experiences, research, and discussions. So students will work on answering that guiding question, what patterns can we observe, and how living things meet their needs. In the first part of the unit, students will continue to build their skills as researchers by engaging with a science talk and answering 3 different questions. What do trees need to live and grow? What do trees provide to help other living things live and grow? And they're going to be answering those questions with the text sugar maple. For the Unit 3 assessment, students again will be having that 3-part science talk. That's going to take place in 3 different lessons, and we'll talk about those in just a few slides. And then Module 3 overview, the knowledge that students build in this Module 3, it's laying our foundation for the application in Module 4. So taking a look at our backwards planning Unit 3 assessment. So here's a look at our end of Unit 3 assessment. As stated, it is a science talk, so make sure you have that science talk protocol posted somewhere to remind students what a science talk should look like. So students will be having that science talk, and you can see the 3 different parts of the lesson. You have part 1 and lesson 6, part 2 and lesson 8, and part 3 and lesson 9. So that first question for part 1, students are going to answer and discuss what do trees need to live and grow, making sure students are referencing any anchor charts or any other resources, also supporting students how to keep the conversation going. We're not answering and stopping, teaching them how to ask a student a question and then answer that question. In part 2, lesson 8, students will respond to the question, what do trees provide to help other living things live and grow? And then the third part in lesson 9, students will answer the question, what patterns can we observe and how living things live and grow? Go ahead and pause the video here and think about specifically what do students need to know or do on this end of Unit 3 assessment. Try to be as specific as possible versus just saying students will need to talk and answer questions. Get to the details of what specific things they will be expected to know content-wise, but also those skills with speaking and listening. As you're ready to move on, press play and we'll take a look at some of my thinking. Hopefully you had some time to identify specifically what students need to know and do for this end of Unit 3 assessment. Let's take a look at some of my thinking. What students will need to be able to know and do. Students will engage in collaborative discussions. They will review and share research of their notes. They'll demonstrate understanding of those key concepts of the questions they'll be focusing on, what trees need to live and grow, how trees help other living things, and observing patterns and how living things get their needs. Students are going to be able to use those sentence starters for communication and prompts to continue the conversation. And students will follow speaking and listening protocols, practicing turn taking, listening to peers, or actively listening, and then adding relevant ideas. Now we're going to take a moment and identify those standards and targets that students will focus on. But first, let's understand how to use the standards matrix. So the standards matrix, you can see your modules listed at the top, module 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then your units underneath of it. So we are currently in module 3, unit 3. Your standards are listed here down the left side. So I'm noticing that our RL standards are not going to be the heavy focus. We're going to be getting into informational text, and that's going to be our standard support. So for example, how I read this is RIK.1 is going to be specifically called out and supported in lessons 2, 5, and 7. RIK2 is called out in even more lessons 2, 5, 7, lessons 10 through 13. So that is how you use this document to support you. So when we identify some of our key standards, I will be able to hone in and say, okay, my students were really struggling with RIK.3. So I know in lesson 2, I need to be reading and identifying within that lesson narrative, how am I supporting students with this standard specifically? How to use these rubrics, pretty similar. You have your standards that are listed for your end of unit assessment rubrics. Your rubric is giving you that standard, but also the learning target that supports it. And then it's giving you the question that is on the assessment, as well as that progression for developing to exemplary mastery. This is great just for your knowledge to kind of think where your students are following within these standards, because I may think, oh, the student is mastering this skill. But if I read what mastering actually means, and if I'm having to provide a lot of support, they may just be progressing. So think about taking a look at this ahead of time before you get to that assessment. So now pause the video here and identify on the end of unit assessment what standards are explicitly assessed on that end of unit assessment. Press play to continue, and I will share some of those answers. So for our end of Unit 3 assessment, you'll notice a lot of those are speaking and listening standards if you were taking a look at the rubric. The speaking and listening standards, yes, those are the ones specifically called out, but we know students are going to use all of their knowledge from their reading informational text or their RI standard work with the comprehension to apply that through speaking and listening. So that's going to be what is the main focus, but we know that students need to get the content and understand that content knowledge as well. So now I want to take a look at 3 different major areas of work that I know that I need to keep in mind to keep me in alignment as I'm unpacking these lessons. So taking a look at that list of what students need to be able to know and do, I want to kind of chunk those into 3 major areas of work. So I know that there's a lot of speaking and listening skills that need to happen. So that's one major work area. Comprehension and knowledge building, all the content that students are going to be learning about and applying to share knowledge. And then lastly, language use and expression. So those are going to be our 3 major work areas, and this is where I'm identifying that. You can also see I called out the lessons. So when I used that standards matrix and looked at these standards specifically, these are the lessons that there's going to be a lot of support and alignment to directly instruct on these standards. So making sure that as I'm reading my lesson narratives, I'm reading through the lens of comprehension and knowledge building, speaking and listening skills, and language use and expression. So as the teacher, when I'm thinking about explicit teaching, I need to make sure that I am in alignment with these three major work areas because that will support me and set my students up for success for this end of Unit 3 assessment. Now I'm just going to click through and show you that end of unit assessment rubric just to have as a reference. And again, taking a look at that scale of developing to exemplary mastery. So now let's shift and think about the end of Unit 3 performance task. You could see the summary of the task and the format here. So students are going to be creating an informational collage to demonstrate their expertise about a tree, its needs, and the animal for which it provides food. The collage is going to have three different parts. The collage, an informational writing piece that describes the tree and its needs and shares information about one animal that depends on the tree for food, and then an accurately colored animal puppet that represents the animal from the student's writing. So we heard in there that the students will have a tree collage, an informative writing piece, and an animal puppet. Here's some more additional information. Gives you what that collage should include and that writing task booklet, what each sentence should be, and information inside of the informative text. Also, here's giving you some different options for students and options for teachers, and then the text that will be used. So students will get to pick from these different trees: paper birch, live oak, quaking aspen, weeping willow, and coast redwood. You are going to be modeling with the sugar maple tree, and students will be doing this work based on that teacher model. So pause the video here and do the work we just did for the end of Unit 3 assessment, but this time for the performance task. Identify what students need to be able to know and do, and use that performance task rubric to identify your standards and targets that students will need to be assessed on and focused on throughout this Unit 3 work. Press play and we will share some of my thinking. So here are some things that students will need to be able to know and do for that end of Unit 3 performance task. They're going to be engaging in discussions, use clear speaking skills, active listening, write and organize information clearly, use pictures and words to convey a meaning, revise and edit their work, create visual representations, use accurate details and drawings, and then present work in a way that communicates knowledge to others. So you could see the standards for this performance task are heavy with the writing and language standards. Again, we know how important the RI standards are going to be as well, because that's going to really be showing us students' comprehension with the content knowledge. So on this slide, this is just taking a look, how do the standards show up on the performance task and the end of unit assessment? So thinking about the lessons that are going to be taught, how are these standards showing up throughout those lessons that are going to support our assessments? So you could see SLK1, students are going to be using a variety of protocols to engage in group discussions. SLK2, students are going to be listening to texts and engaging in conversations to ask and answer questions using those key details in the text. SLK3, students are going to be doing language dives and science talks. In SLK4, for the last one, our last standard on the end of unit assessment, students are going to be describing trees, living things, and events in their own words, and creating an informational collage when writing and drawing. Now shifting to the performance task, our WK2, students are going to be writing that informative writing piece about trees using drawings and dictating sentences. WK5, students are going to receive feedback from their peers and teacher or also visitors based on their work. WK6, students are going to be working collaboratively in their groups as they're doing their research on their tree and also sharing information with one another. And then LK.2, when students are doing their informative writing, they will be working on this standard specifically, focusing on the command of conventions. So let's take a look at our lesson overviews. Again, as we are looking at our lesson overviews and internalizing, the overviews are giving you support of a summary. This does not take away your internalization of your lessons of reading that lesson narrative. So to do that internalization, keeping our 3 major work areas in your mind, go ahead and read through your lessons 1 through 5 or divide them up with your PLC work and start taking notes on, as you are reading, explicit teaching, student practice, and checks for understanding. That checks for understanding should be aligned to the learning target. Thinking as you're reading these lessons, making sure that are we providing students with support and direct instruction with speaking and listening? Are we giving them direct instruction and support and practice with their comprehension and knowledge building, and also language use and expression? When I'm reading through my lesson narratives, I like to just take 3 highlighters, 1 for explicit teaching, 1 for student practice, and a different color for checks for understanding. As you are reading through these, annotate on your lesson narrative, and then come together as a group to talk about what's the evidence for explicit teaching in lesson 1. And be very specific. For example, if I am asking students to write an informative writing piece and I'm sharing with them, we're going to write a focus statement. Well, in the lesson narrative, if it does not tell me how to teach kids to write a focus statement, that's some explicit teaching that I need to make sure that I add in. I need to explain what a focus statement is, as well as provide some explicit writing instruction through my teacher model. That is going to be the notes that I'm taking inside of this section. Now let's take a look at our lesson overviews. So beginning with lesson 1, students are going to get a general background of their new research topic by using the text, Are Trees Alive? There is a language dive in this lesson. Please make sure we're not skipping over those to provide students that work with different layers of language to understand and comprehend at the sentence level. Lesson 2, this is where your teacher model is going to come into play. As you're reading aloud the sugar maple text, students are going to be gathering research notes and following your model. Lesson 3, which I will be modeling a portion of this lesson, you'll be reading your text and then writing your focus statement and detail sentence. Lesson 4 is that shared writing piece, drafting detailed sentences. Lesson 5 is where students will be getting into their small groups to begin their research. Again, allowing students to choose which tree they would like to research, but then strategically planning who in those groups could work together. Lesson 6, students will continue their note-taking and research, and through lesson 7. Lesson 6 also is that assessment part 1, which is that first science talk question. Lesson 8, you could see assessment part 2, that's our second science talk question. And lesson 9, part 3, that's our third science talk question. Lesson 10 is where students will start their collage, but then also drafting their focus statement. Lesson 11, they're going to be drafting their first detail sentence, working on that collage. Lesson 12, their second detail sentence, working on that collage. As students are writing, make sure to provide that feedback in the moment so they know what they can fix and improve on. Lesson 13, again, students will finish that tree collage and their third detail sentence. Lesson 14 is time for students to practice and prep. What does this share out look like? What is this going to look like when they're sharing with someone? Lesson 15 is that celebration. So consider who is going to come into your classroom to celebrate students' work that they've done for Module 3. Consider allowing the students to make their own invitation to either invite families or other classrooms or other teachers to come in and understand and learn what students have been working on. So now let's take a look at a lesson in action. And the portion of this lesson that I'm going to be modeling is lesson 3. And this is where your teacher model is going to be huge with setting students up with writing instruction for their focus statement and their detail sentence. All right, boys and girls, so we're going to read a new poem. And as Miss Hessen reads, I want you to listen to how I'm reading fluently. So at the right speed, I'm not going too fast, I'm not going too slow. But then also, I want you to listen for some special words. We've been talking about the word noun. Say noun. And I think we have an anchor chart up in our classroom. Who can point to where that anchor chart is? Great job. I want you to turn and tell your partner, what is a noun? Good. I heard a lot of you and saw a lot of you looking back at our anchor chart. A noun is a person, place, or thing. So as I'm reading, I want you to listen and see if you can hear any of those nouns. Listen as I read. Clay leaves. Leaves grow on trees in different colors and move when the wind blows them. A curvy or a wiggle, you can trace them with your pen and watch them when they fall to the ground and turn to clay. Now, I want you to think, what were some of those words that we heard in this text that were nouns? Go ahead and turn and share with your partner. So I would allow students to share with their partner. As they're sharing out, lean in and listen to what they're saying to one another, and then start calling out and agreeing with them or correcting if there's any misunderstandings. Great job, boys and girls. All right, now I want you to listen as I read a new text, and you have this text in front of you, and it's called Sugar Maple. So our first tree that we're going to learn about is the sugar maple tree, but there's 3 important things we need to listen for. We need to listen for what the tree looks like, what the tree needs, and what other things depend on this tree. I want you to turn and tell your partner, what are the 3 things we're listening for with our sugar maple text? Great job. Yes, you're listening for what the tree looks like, what the tree needs, and what other things depend on this tree. Listen as I read. Maple trees have leaves that are yellow, red, and orange. These trees have brown bark that is rough. Trees need water, sun, soil. Moose eat leaves from the maple trees. Let's think about our first question. What does the tree look like? Use your text and go back and see if you and your partner can find what did it tell us the maple tree looks like. Good. I see you going back and rereading. I hear a lot of you say they have leaves that are yellow, red, and orange. So Miss Hessen's going to write that in this first box for what the tree looks like. Maple trees have leaves that are yellow, red, and orange. What else did it say? Yes, it talked about the bark on the tree that is rough. It has brown bark that is rough. So I'm going to write brown bark that is rough. And this, what does this tree look like? Now let's think about our next question. What does the tree need? Who can tell me, what does it say the tree needs? And I want you to point to that sentence in the text. Yes, you're right. They need water, sun, and soil. Also, as I'm writing on my anchor chart, I may go back and add some images to this to support my students to refer back to this and see those images attached to the words. All right, lastly, let's think, what other living things depend on this tree? Yes, we learned about the moose likes to eat leaves from the maple tree. So I'm going to add that for what other living things depend on this tree. Great job. Let's take a look at our learning target. I can use information from research to contribute to a piece of shared writing. I want you to turn and tell your partner, what do you think this means? What are we going to be doing? As students are talking again, monitor what they're saying to one another. Then I'm going to bring us back together and start talking about some of these different words to break apart so they understand what they're learning about. Let's look at that word information. Say information. So we're going to be using information from research. What information are we going to be using? Yes, we're going to be reading new text about trees to contribute to a piece of shared writing. What does that word shared mean? Yes, we're going to do this work together. So Miss Hessen's going to be modeling it for you and talking us through it as we are writing this first text together. So if we want to write a focus statement for our sugar maple tree, this is the big idea of our text. So when the reader reads this first sentence, they'll say, I know what we're going to learn about. So what was our tree we just talked about? Yes, the sugar maple tree. So my first sentence, my focus statement is going to be, this is a sugar maple tree. Let's count those words in that sentence. Let's see how many words there are. This is a sugar maple tree. There's 6 words in this sentence. Let's think, what was our first word? This. Good job. And I hear 2 letters that go together that tickle our teeth. What are those 2 letters that go together? TH. Awesome. Who wants to come up and write our word this? So again, as students are coming up to share and write their word this, you could have them writing this on the big anchor chart while you, under a dot cam, could also be modeling this writing. This is your opportunity to teach writing instruction to our students. So reminding them about a capital letter at the beginning of their sentence, and then everything else should be lowercase unless we have a proper noun. So this is your time to be sharing that work and that information to our students. So let's look at our first detail sentence. How can we describe the sugar maple tree? What does it look like? Let's go back and look at our text if we can't remember, but turn and tell your partner, what does the sugar maple tree look like? It has lots of green, yellow, and orange leaves. Let's count how many words in that sentence. And who wants to come up and write our first word, it? And let's think, let's tap out that word, it. It. What's our first sound in our word, it? Good, it's that letter I. And now when we're writing a first word in a sentence, what do we need to do with that letter I? It should be a capital letter. So again, just reminding students how to do this writing portion. So when they get to go do it independently, they know what's expected of them. While you are modeling this work, students could be writing their own sentence on the whiteboard. They could be following along with you. You can think about however you want to do that. But the important thing is that you model what the teacher model, but also allow students the chance to come up and each write a different word for that sentence to come together. And then lastly, making sure we're adding those images to go with our text and using accurate colors. So if I say our sugar maple tree has yellow, red, and orange leaves, my picture for this first detail sentence may be a red leaf, an orange leaf, and a green leaf. That way I can remember what my first detail sentence is. So now we're going to take a look at some key steps, key points, and next steps. So you're going to use that format of internalization, finishing for your first couple of lessons 1 through 5, or do all of them for this unit, however you feel fit, to divide that work up with your team. Thinking about those 3 major work areas and then identifying explicit teaching, student practice, and checks for understanding. Those checks for understanding should be the alignment to know if my students mastered this learning target or not. Identify some 2 other next steps for yourself, and you will share these as you fill out the survey on this next slide. Here is our kindergarten feedback survey form. Please take the time to fill this out because I do like to read these and I take your feedback to heart so that way I can make this tailored to what you need. And then lastly, if you are doing this on February 26th, which is our early release day, this is the CMS attendance feedback form. Make sure this is a new form that you are completing this for that early release day. That course code is going to be ERD, all capital letters, 01. So pay attention to when it asks for attendance code and course code that you are typing in the correct letters or numbers. And I'd lastly just want to close out and say thank you. I hope you enjoy teaching Unit 3 and setting that foundation for beginning that work with Module 4. Please send me pictures or videos of celebrations or things that are going well with modules or even skills block in kindergarten, because I've gotten very few from a lot of teachers, and I would love to start using what is happening in your classrooms in our weekly tidbits, as well as highlighting you in our next PLC deep dive. Have a great time teaching Unit 3, and please reach out if you have questions or wonderings. Take care.